Have you ever thought about building something but decided not to because you thought, well, certainly this thing exists? That's the story that you're going to hear from today's guest. Today's guest is Keith Pitt. He is the CTO at BuildKite. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. You're listening to Developer Tea, and my goal on the show is to help driven developers like you find clarity, perspective, and purpose in their careers. And I'm very excited to talk to Keith in this episode. I hope you will subscribe so you don't miss out on the second part of my interview with Keith. Let's get straight into the interview with Keith Pitt. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm very excited to have you on, and I'm excited to talk about your journey as a founder, as a co-founder, as now a CTO at BuildKite. I actually did a little bit of digging, and I found that you worked once upon a time at Envato. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's actually kind of where BuildKite started, at Envato.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah, maybe this is a good segue into telling the story of BuildKite. Straight stuck into it. So I was at Envato, and I was working on a tool there at the time called MicroLancer. It's now known as Envato Studio, I think. And it was a small tool within the company, and we were using a hosted CI tool called Travis CI. And Travis, I'm a big fan of Travis. I love Travis. They do amazing things in the open source community. And this was I think 7 or 8 years ago. And this was during a time when the GitHub permission model was very simple. And that permission model was if you connect one repo to a third party on GitHub, then the third party gets access to every repo on GitHub. And I was only a small team within Envato, and we were working on a small tool. And one day we did this risk assessment sort of workshop. And one of the questions we were asked was, do you know where your code is at all times? And as we filled out that spreadsheet, we had to answer no to that question. We didn't know where our code was at all times because we had a really good idea of where it was with GitHub, but we didn't know where it was with Travis. And so we were told, the other teams in the company use hosted CI providers. We really want you to leave Travis and use a hosted CI provider. And I was really bummed by this because Travis was part of this new wave of next-gen developer experience type CI products. I was used to tools like Heroku and GitHub, those the tools that had really modern developer user experience. But a lot of the hosted CI/CD tools, like your Jenkins, your TeamCity, and your Bamboos, didn't have that. A lot of them were built before the iPhone came along. And so none of them really had that developer experience that I was really expecting. And so I went on the hunt. I was like, surely there is a tool. This tool that I envisioned in my head of a self-hosted CI/CD tool that had a really modern dev experience. Surely this exists. And I went looking for it. And to my surprise, I couldn't find it. I was thinking, surely I'm Googling this wrong. Surely I'm holding it wrong. I'm holding Google wrong. Surely this thing exists, but it didn't. And so I kind of felt compelled to build it. I was thinking to myself, maybe I'll try building something in my spare time. Maybe I'll spend a few weeks building something and see what comes of it. And that was 7 or 8 years ago, and I'm still building it to this day. But that's kind of how the idea came along. It was just, I had identified a problem in my own career and in my own job, and I set out to solve it myself. And I've always been a fan of building things. I've always enjoyed building things. I wouldn't consider myself an entrepreneur or a business person, but I think if you were to write down the things that I have done in my career, that probably are the labels that would be applied to me. But I just don't see myself as that. I see myself as someone who enjoys building technology, building tools, and having fun with technology.
If you were to evaluate the landscape, and let's say BuildKite didn't exist today, and you were to look at the available tooling out there, and maybe you find that there are some other self-hosted kinds of things, and would that have deterred you? Kind of trying to rewind back. If you had found something that kind of filled that need for you. Would you have, gone and built something yourself, or was that really the critical kind of crux of the matter, that it didn't exist yet and you wanted it to?
I think if I had found what I was looking for at the time, I probably wouldn't have built it. Um, I just felt compelled for this thing to exist because the problem wasn't solved. If someone had solved it already for me, I would have been great. I would have been very, very happy and over the moon. Because I'm way more about the problem being solved than solving the problem myself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that if the tool had existed, I probably would have used it already, but it didn't. So I just felt like the need to build it.
So that's the story. It was this need that you had, and you were able to recognize it. You were able to see clearly kind of what you wanted to do. You saw the other, competing, or not even competing, but kind of the pieces of the puzzle, the different pieces of the puzzle. One did one thing you liked, another did another thing you liked, but they didn't all, none of them did everything that you needed them to do. And it wasn't necessarily, I'm going to put kind of words in your mouth. It wasn't necessarily because it was a novel idea. It was because it was a mix of multiple ideas that had already been executed on, just not together. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. I wasn't like I took the best of both worlds. So, for listeners that may not know much about CI/CD, there are two different sort of flavors of CI/CD. The first flavor is the self-hosted option, and that's where you run the tests yourself on servers that you control, and then you run the orchestration plane yourself as well. And that's got a big con, and if you have a distributed team where they need to access the tool from home, a lot of these tools aren't really that great of being run on open internet. So a lot of them are sort of kept within VPNs or hidden inside offices. That's the self-hosted option. The other option is the hosted CI/CD tools, your Circles, your Traverses, and those tools, you hand over all of your code to them, and they manage the orchestration plane and the running of the tests yourself. The problem with that is twofold. With the hosted options, there are two major problems. The first problem is you have to hand over all of your deploy keys. If you want to do continuous deployment, which I'm a big fan of, you have to hand over your deploy keys to a third party, which for some organizations is a bit of a no-go. The second problem is that those tools only go so fast. If you go to their pricing page, you'll see this slider that only goes so far to the right. And you can only go so fast without there being a big sign that says contact us to go faster. And I didn't want any of those. Like, I didn't accept the cons of the hosted option. I didn't want to accept the cons of the self-hosted option. And so I was thinking to myself, surely there is some middle ground. And so I sort of set out to kind of cherry pick the best of both worlds and sort of create a mashup of what I thought would be the perfect tool. And that's how BuildKite was born.
And I wanted to zero in on this idea because I think it's important to recognize, especially for engineers who are kind of thinking, oh, I have this idea and it doesn't exist, but people can do it themselves if they go and, mix X and Y, these two existing things out there. A lot of these ideas that tend to be kind of remixes of multiple other ideas together, or, taking one thing, the best of both worlds, like you said, the new product is multiplicative in value rather than additive, right? In other words, somebody could probably go and run, two different things to get the same values. But when you put them together, it changes the landscape. It's not the same thing as just running those two things back to back. It's changing kind of the fundamental shape of that product. And so it's important to recognize that because most critically, I think a lot of people who are thinking about starting a business, or they're thinking, hey, I might, do this side thing. I might, build a product on the side. I think a lot of them are thinking, oh, I have to come up with a truly new, completely novel idea, or else nobody's going to want it, right? There can't be a shadow of this idea on the market. Otherwise, it's already saturated. Every idea is already taken, and I have to come up with something totally new for it to be successful. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's no such thing as a new idea. I think South Park said it really well. They have this episode called The Simpsons Already Did It. And there's a recurring joke where they have these themes or plots within the episode, but The Simpsons have already done that particular plot. It's the same with products as well. If you look at the big ones, Uber is taxis. But they sort of took it and did a mashup and made it better. Airbnb, hotels. But they've taken it and mashed it up and made something new. CI/CD, I didn't invent CI/CD. I didn't invent it at all. I just took the best of a bunch of really good ideas and put them together to create something new and a new product. And I think that's kind of what a lot of the tools are these days, are just improvements of existing ideas. I think that, I don't think Facebook will be around forever. There will be a better Facebook at some point. There will be a better Spotify at some point. There will be a better Apple at some point. No one holds king forever. So I think it's a matter of just sort of leaning into those new ideas. If you think you have an idea of something, I would absolutely go build it, because and even if no one uses it, I think the building of something in and of itself is a journey and a lesson. BuildKite wasn't my first CI/CD platform. I have built a CI/CD platform before. I built one 12 years ago. It was called Jasper, and it never saw the light of day, but we used it at my job. And I learned a ton of lessons around how to build this sort of tool then. And then it sort of went back on the back burner in my mind for 4 or 5 years. And then this problem resurfaced in my career. And I thought, well, now is the time to try it. And I don't think BuildKite would have been as successful as it was if I hadn't already built a version of it long before that failed miserably.
Huh. It's great to hear that, because I can really relate in kind of a very small way. Before I ever started this podcast, I actually was considering starting a different one. This was very, very early in my career, and it was when podcasts were still quite young. And my idea was to talk. I was mostly a front end developer at the time. I was going to talk with a back end developer, and we would chat back and forth. And essentially, and I didn't even know who this person would be. I was just kind of assuming that I would find somebody who would be willing to be a co-host, and we would talk about kind of the differences or the negotiation points between the front end and the back end. This would have eventually, and probably pretty quickly, gotten old, right? But now, fast forward a couple of years after that, and I decided to start Developer T. And it's interesting to see how these ideas that keep recurring or keep resurfacing tend to be the ones that, at least that I've heard from other entrepreneurs or other people who start things like podcasts or whatever, the ones that stick with you tend to be the ones that you're going to stick with. You're going to continue investing in that idea because it's something that has resurfaced multiple times.
Yeah, totally. And I think that one bit of advice that I have to people when I talk about this sort of stuff is, if you have an idea and you want to build it, focus on the idea, focus on building the idea. I love video games. I play a lot of video games, and I've always wanted to make a video game. But whenever I've started to make a video game, I've always got stuck on the engine and building of a tool. And I would get stuck up sort of on the idea of trying to build this amazing engine for this game. It's kind of funny how when you look at CI/CD and BuildKite, the tool itself, it's kind of sort of like the engine for a video game, really, where the tests are the game and the platform is itself the the tool. But one thing that I think that made BuildKite successful is that I used the tools that I knew when I built BuildKite. A lot of the people that I know who set out to build something often sort of tie that in with learning a new language or a new framework at the same time. And I feel like they end up getting stuck on learning the thing at the same time as building a thing. And if you want to learn a language and sort of build a thing at the same time, that's totally cool. But if you want the tool or the idea to succeed, I think the best way you can make it succeed is by using the tools that you knew. And I'd probably categorize myself as a Ruby on Rails developer. And I use Ruby on Rails to build BuildKite. I think that if I was to have looked at BuildKite's requirements today, Rails may not have been the right choice. But at the time, Rails was the right choice because I knew it, and that meant that I wasn't worrying about the technology. I was worrying about the idea and the implementation of the idea and how customers enjoyed the idea, and less around the technical implementation.
No matter what you are building, you can build it on top of Linode. Today's episode is sponsored by Linode. And with Linode, you can simplify your infrastructure and cut your cloud bills in half. You can do this with Linode's Linux virtual machines by developing, deploying, and scaling your modern applications faster and easier. Whether you're developing a personal project or managing larger workloads, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions. By the way, you can launch BuildKite on Linode because anything that works on Linux, it runs on Linode. You can get started with $100 in free credit for listeners of Developer Tea. You find all the details at linode.com/developertea. Make sure you go and click the Create Free Account button to get started. Linode has data centers around the world with the same simple and consistent pricing, regardless of the location that you choose. So choose the data center nearest you or nearest to your customers. You also receive the full top-tier support. The reason for that is because there are no tiers or handoffs, regardless of your plan size. So you can get the same support level as you scale from the bottom up. You can choose shared and dedicated compute instances, or you can use your $100 in credit on S3 compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. Head over to linode.com/developertea and click on the Create Free Account button to get started today. Thanks again to Linode for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Tea. Yeah, it's really interesting. I've come across this discussion multiple times, both on the show and in the real world of, how do you pick, this is the never-ending argument, especially for people who are in their jobs already, right? How do you pick a tool? Well, there's a lot to consider with the answer to that question, but very often the answer is go with what you know. It's a good heuristic, at least, because what it ends up providing is something that you're likely fluent in. And so whatever your most common thinking language is very likely going to be the one that you're most productive in. Now, with that said, there's also plenty of kind of soft value in other languages, pursuing other languages as well. I can imagine that, if you were to go and learn another language that, or another framework even within a language that you already know, that you may be able to kind of flex the learning muscles through the product you're building, right? There's some kind of motivation there, but I agree with you. The idea that, you're very likely to be successful with something that you already know, so you can focus on one thing rather than, going off on a tangent to learn all about, let's say you're learning Rails. Well, you need to go and learn all about Action Controller, right? Or it's been a while since I've worked in Rails, but you're going to go off on this tangent, and it's not really producing any value directly to the thing you were building, right? Or you could get hung up between two different gems, and you're trying to decide which one do I want to use for authentication. I don't know. And then you go and do a bunch of research on authentication gems rather than building the form that you need to authenticate with, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think that a great example of learning at the same time is the BuildKite agent. So BuildKite is a hybrid CI/CD, which means that the orchestration plane and the platform itself is hosted. We look after that. We take care of all the hard bits with that. And you run, and the other part of it is the agent. And the BuildKite agent you install on servers that you control. And BuildKite sort of orchestrates work being run on those agents. When I first started writing BuildKite, the agent was written in Ruby because Ruby is what I know. But if you were to sort of write down a list of requirements for what the agent is, this extremely strong process that runs on machines, that never breaks, that is long-lived and can run on different operating systems, Ruby is probably not the best choice for that. But I wrote it in Ruby because that's what I knew. And after about a year, that didn't work anymore. Ruby was not the right choice for that particular problem. Ruby had a lot of memory related issues when it's long-lived. And having customers install a very specific version of Ruby on their servers to be able to run this agent was just a bad developer experience. So I needed to choose a different language to solve this particular problem. And I didn't know Golang before that. So I set out to rebuild the agent in Golang. And that was a successful learning experience because I had a very strong problem I was trying to solve. And it was a very sort of, the scope was small, rewrite the agent in Go. And that meant that I could learn Go at the same time, and sort of had a real concrete idea of what I was trying to build. And I didn't sort of lose my way in the idea because the idea was already very, very clear. I was really successful in learning Go when I did that particular job.
It's kind of interesting. I actually really like this way, this kind of method of learning a new thing. Having a fairly sophisticated product or fairly sophisticated idea that you've already built, that you can see kind of the technical implementation of in another language, and then choosing to, for more or less, translate, right? You're trying to say, okay, I've got this idea over here in Ruby, and I want to translate this functionality, this functional idea into something in Go. Now, what it kind of forces you to do is these different steps of kind of metaphor creating, or the translation process is very mechanical. You say, okay, I've got a class in Ruby. What do I do with that in Go? Right? It's a very different structure. It has some different concepts. I've got this a function in Ruby, and it takes multiple types of input. How can I support that in Go? And you start to learn about, Go's structure, its underlying structure, by comparing it, or I guess contrasting it with an existing Ruby project. And you have like a built-in test. Have I learned it? Well, did the thing work? Right? And it gives you some true validation. And in a way, it's almost like refactoring, right? You're just kind of refactoring to a completely different language rather than, within
yeah, totally. And that's how I learned Go. I would look at the code in Ruby and I would say, okay, I need to do a HTTP call. Then I would Google how to do a HTTP call in Go. And then I would stumble across some Stack Overflow post and then sort of go from there. And the next problem, how do I shell out to a process in Go? I would Google that and sort of figure out how to do that. And so I would mutate the Ruby into Go bit by bit by just sort of solving one small bit at a time, and sort of learning as I went through that process. And that worked out really, really well for me.
Yeah, that's such an interesting process. I'm curious. I kind of want to take a step back and take a look at your career. I want to ask you a question that I tend to ask towards the end of these interviews. What do you wish more people would ask you about?
Wow, that's a spicy one. That is a spicy question. What do I wish people would ask me about? I wish people would ask me more about how they can build a product or how they can start a business. Because I don't feel like I'm particularly smart. I don't feel like I am this whiz-bang engineer. I dropped out of high school to pursue a career in programming. I would love to tell you that the reason I dropped out of high school was for some Bill Gates related reason where I was really, really smart, but I had a really bad breakup with a girl. So I dropped out of high school and started programming full time. So I don't see myself as, and I've not been traditionally trained. I haven't got a university degree. And so I don't consider myself all that smart, but what I do consider myself is sort of just being excited by ideas. And I wish people would ask me about how to build something, or how to be excited by an idea more, or what can they do to build something. That's what I wish people would ask me more about.
It's interesting that you are focused on this this kind of fuel, the motivation, rather than a specific skill set, or all the way on the other end of that scale, I guess, would be tricks, right? What is the secret to a successful business? But it seems that you are kind of on the opposite end. You're not talking about skills or tricks or that one thing that you need to do or that one book you need to read. But instead, it seems that what you care most about is this passion or fuel or focus on the idea. Would you say that that's the most important thing for a successful venture like this?
Absolutely, I would. I feel like it's easy to get caught up in everything but the idea. I know that I tend to have these hobbies, and I tend to go deep into these hobbies. I never really am successful in a hobby. For example, my most recent hobby is miniature painting. I love board games, and I tend to have lots of board games with minis. And I really wanted to paint them all, so I did a lot of research in the paints that I need, the brushes that I'll need. I would watch lots of YouTube videos of techniques, but in all those things that I was doing, the one thing I wasn't doing was painting. I was sort of gearing
Yeah.
myself up. I'm like, one day I'm just gonna learn everything I need to learn, and then I'll go paint a mini. I think I've painted 2 minis, and I have probably 100 paints and 20 different brushes. And I've watched probably 100 hours of YouTube video of people painting, but I've only painted 2 or 3 minis. I feel like what I should have done is just started painting. Just start
Yeah.
painting a mini, and then I will learn. And then I could sort of hone my craft from there. And I feel like that's what people sometimes do with ideas for products and businesses. They skirt around the idea. They have to read this book first. They have to read this language first. They have to go to this seminar. They have to join this incubator. They have to do all these things before they can actually do the idea. And I wish that they would just do the idea. Just go build it. Use what you know. Go build something. Because often I feel like, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. I feel like a prototype is worth 1,000 words. And it's not until, when I was starting out BuildKite, I would tell people the idea. Oh, it's CI/CD platform that is hybrid. And people would say to me, I don't get it. Why don't you just use X, Y, Z? Just use this other thing. I don't understand exactly what you said before. Can't you just add these two things together and get the same outcome? Absolutely, you can. But it wasn't until they sort of got their hands on something tangible, that they could say, I get it now. I understand what you were trying to achieve. And I know that it's easy to have people get you down when you do things like customer research and sort of like finding, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do around an idea that is not building the idea. I think that if you truly are passionate about the idea, you should go try and build it. And it doesn't matter if no one buys it. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sell, because I bet you that idea will come back in 5 years' time, and that will be a successful idea. So even if even if your first attempt doesn't go anywhere, that's totally fine, because things that you learn in doing that will pay dividends the next time you build something.
Yeah. This is kind of gold in a lot of ways. This advice that focusing on the idea. I think there are certain personalities perhaps that tend to do what you were saying. It's kind of this information hoarding or over preparedness. I do this as well. I kind of stock up on all the things that I might need. For example, I think if you're painting miniatures, you may be also interested in 3D printing. That's actually something I've been interested in recently. So, I went and I found, I did all the research on what are the best filaments, and I went and I got those filaments, and, I went overboard in kind of trying to learn rather than getting in and just kind of designing things. I really enjoy the functional print, that style of 3D printing. And finally, I realized, what? The best thing for me to do is to open up my 3D, design tool and to start making mistakes, start making prints that I'm going to throw away. This stuff is cheap. And I think in the back of my mind, this hoarding of, ideas, information, even supplies is maybe an instinct to save something, to not waste something. Not waste my time, not waste my energy, not waste the plastic filament. But at the end of the day, that instinct to not waste ends up wasting more. It's kind of this weird paradox, possibly, that I don't want to waste my time. A good example of this for an engineer that's starting out is I don't want to waste my time learning the wrong language. Right? I hear this all the time. I don't want to, go down the path of this other language, this wrong tool, and then regret it. And so we end up spinning in circles trying to find the right thing. And, I can't use that one because it's, I don't know, the community might be less than it was last year. There's not as many people using it. So I'm going to write that one off. And I can't use that one because of another reason. And then we end up doing nothing, right? We're totally actionless. And I'm interested to know if you feel like this is something that is that you can kind of will yourself through, or if it's important to kind of recognize how this could be a part of your personality and to find ways to kind of cope with it or get around it to be more productive or more active on your ideas.
Once you've recognized it, that's step one, I think. I think we tend to value, it's kind of funny, we tend to value money cheaper than our time. I was able to go buy some paints and some paintbrushes for miniature painting, and it felt like I was making a good investment. My time is way more valuable than just buying this $20 paint for this miniature paint that I wanted to paint. But we should be buying more of our time. In that time that I spent researching and investigating all these things, I should have been painting with what I had. And buying more of my own time just to do something and investing in that more, because knowledge, they say knowledge is power, but that's definitely the case here. When you want to learn a tool, I have a ton of knowledge in programming that is completely useless now. I know how to make web pages with tables and layouts with tables, and that is knowledge that I have that it will never be used again. And this was when I was first starting my career. I had two options. I could learn about this new thing called CSS that I didn't really know or understand. Why would I be using a different file? I don't get it. I'm just going to make tables. And I learned that. But if you were to, in hindsight, that was the wrong thing to learn. But it meant that when I did learn CSS, I was able to appreciate it much more. I understood the other way better, so then I could compare and contrast with the new way of doing things. This is so much better than it was before. I know this other thing now, and I know not to use that one again. So even if I do learn a tool or some language that ends up being not that useful, I think people underestimate that knowing not to use something is also very, very useful in and of itself.
Yeah. It's, I think knowledge, especially in this career, in this industry, knowledge is much more fluid than we give it credit for. Partially, and maybe this is something that we're trained to do. We have these bullet points on our resume, and we consider knowledge to be whenever we know enough to feel comfortable to put it on our resume, right?
Yeah.
So we learn in these categories. We learn a framework. We learn a language. But actually, what we're learning is something totally different. We're not just learning a language, because you could learn a language and never make anything valuable with it, right? So does it matter really that you know that language? What you've actually done when you learn something, or when you learn not to use something, is you've learned more about kind of a landscape than you have about a technology. You're learning comparative analysis between different tools, right? It's a deeper knowledge than what we give credit to. And it's about this kind of orchestration of skills rather than, a specific thing, right? I know how to manage a Kubernetes cluster. Well, okay, great. What does that mean? How does it fit in with the bigger picture of managing software servers, right? What do you do with it, and why does it matter, right? If you just know it, if you just have the certification, then that's just another bullet point on the resume. But if you're learning, okay, here's why Kubernetes is, ostensibly better, right? Than the thing that I was using before, then you can recognize, for example, when it's overkill, right? That's a perfect example of this. The advanced DevOps engineer might be able to quickly say, "You're doing too much," right? And you're buying too much into this as a solution to a problem that you don't even have. That's the kind of learning that I think is a marker of a long and kind of successful career.
Yeah, and I think that we should just learn to not regret the things that we learn. There's no regrets, because everything that you have done in your career thus far has led you to this point. And everything you do from now on will lead to some other point. And I guarantee if you don't do the things that you are doing today, that might not lead you to some point in the future. I have learned lots of tools and learned lots of things. I have spent countless hours with CI/CD tools before BuildKite. I'd spend hours and hours configuring Jenkins and configuring Travis and these other tools. And all of that time that I spent, even though at the time I didn't know it, all of that time was sort of being stored in the back of my brain. And I could use that knowledge when I built BuildKite. That knowledge came out of me, and I could use that to inform the things that I was building. And so nothing is wasted. You're never wasting your time by learning something. I think that, but for me, I learn by doing. That's the biggest thing that I know about myself, is I learn by doing. I don't really learn by hoarding information like you were talking about before.
Yeah. I'll extend that even further and say that your knowledge bank is not just limited to your technology skills, right? What you're doing in your hobbies and painting miniatures, that knowledge in some way that perhaps we can't really access or understand is going to play into the rest of your knowledge, right? It gives you a broader range of things to pull from, a broader range of models to pull from to understand the world. And just because it's not code, right? Just because, whatever you want to say is separate, it's out in this other world, doesn't mean that it's not going to make you a more kind of capable person, a more capable engineer.
Yeah, totally. And there are other things in my life that I can look back on that really helped BuildKite the business be successful. I've had some pretty crappy jobs in my career. I've worked for some people that I wouldn't consider good bosses, but all of that time that I spent with them really helped me hone in what not to do when I started a business. When we started hiring people, I learned very, very quickly what I shouldn't be doing based off of my experience in the past of having bad bosses. And so if you've got a bad boss now, one day you will use those learnings when you start managing people. You'll remember that, I remember that time that my boss did that thing. Yeah, I won't do that again.
Yeah. I mean, with things like a hobby or with things like a previous job that has nothing to do with this industry, you learn kind of these meta skills, right? And you might, for example, I'm just kind of making this up, but you might learn the importance of patience with painting. Right? Yeah. I screwed this up, but it's resilience. You might also learn how resilient the things that you're working with can be, that you can repaint that particular portion, or that it's easy to start over, that you can wash things off. Again, I'm kind of extending the metaphor a little bit further than perhaps it has the legs to go. But this is the kind of thinking, though, that integrated learning experience that we can have, that everything plays into everything else. And I do think that, those small experiences make us a more complete version, a better thinker than we would otherwise be. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Developer Tea, the first part of my interview with the CTO and co-founder of BuildKite. Go and find out more about what BuildKite does and what it can do for your company at buildkite.com. BuildKite did not sponsor this episode and has not sponsored Developer Tea in the past. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Today's episode was sponsored by Linode. Head over to linode.com/developertea. You can get $100 worth of free credit by using that specific link. That's linode.com/developertea. This episode and every other episode of Developer Tea can be found at spec.fm, and this episode was produced by Sarah Jackson. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the second part of this interview, and until next time, enjoy your tea.